Ready Player One.
Dave's
Pop culture
Podcast.
Did you put pizza all over this house? You make me so angry, or you're fired.
Good one, Patrick.
Welcome to another episode of Dave's Pop Culture Podcast YouTube edition. A few episodes ago, we entered the world of DC Comics when we started our Batman-themed episode called Bat-Chat. Today, we're turning the tables and taking a dive into the world of Marvel as we do our first ever Spidey-Chat. So join us as we talk about some of our favorite portrayals of Spider-Man.
This was a series that really got me into Marvel. It introduced me not only to Spider-Man, but also a host of other characters that I hadn't seen before. There were some stories that featured team-ups with other characters from the Marvel Universe, including Captain America, Thor, Iron Man, Sunfire, and the X-Men. I am talking, of course, Spider-Man from Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends. I had everything to do with this version of Spider-Man. I had the pajamas, I had the lunchbox, I had the stationery set. What I love about this cartoon and this portrayal of Spider-Man was they never really go into the backstory of Spider-Man. It's very much he's an established character at this point. The cartoon style is very simplistic. Reminds me very much of the Hanna-Barbera style Scooby-Doo Dungeons and Dragons from that sort of time period. It ran for 3 seasons from 1981 to 1983. And this was a direct response to replicate the success of the DC Super Friends franchise that was already running on TV. The series was re-aired in the late 80s as part of a 90-minute Marvel Action Universe, alongside the potential pilot of the ever-loved 90s X-Men cartoon. If you've never seen the show, it basically revolves around Peter Parker, Spider-Man, obviously Bobby Drake, Iceman, and Angelica Jones, Firestar, who was created specifically for the series because they had licensing issues with Human Torch, because they wanted it to be Spider-Man, Iceman, and Human Torch living together in Aunt May's house with Firestar's pet dog, Miss Lion. Again, I believe that was a copy of the dog that appeared in the Super Friends animation. It was the series that not only introduced me to Spider-Man, but it introduced me to the world of Stan Lee and that iconic voice that forever I'm going to associate with anything Marvel, because he was the narrator from Series 2. He wasn't the narrator in Series 1. In the reruns, they went back and re-added Stan Lee to be the narrator on Series 1. The portrayal of Spider-Man and Peter Parker in this was very much... They were a lot older, so they were sort of late teens. It wasn't the sort of teenage angst sort of Spider-Man and Peter Parker. It was very much sort of fully fleshed, essentially an adult. They barely dwell on anything outside of them being their superhero alter egos. And it's just a lot of humor, a lot of very simplistic sort of plots, sort of something you don't get in cartoons anymore. It always gives me a lot of nostalgia when you have, the villain explaining what he's going to do as he's flying along. It's just stuff like that you just don't see anymore. It was also because of this show that I forever associated Doctor Doom with a Spider-Man villain. He appears in, I think it's like the 3rd episode, and it's something that's always stuck with me as Doctor Doom is a Spider-Man villain. So whenever I see him in Fantastic Four, it doesn't sit right with me. But for me, he'll always be a Spider-Man villain purely because of this cartoon.
That's really something I didn't know about Doctor Doom.
I thought he was a Fantastic Four villain. Yeah.
Like exclusively. I mean, I knew he was just an awesome villain, but with Spider-Man, well, that's very unique. I'm glad I just learned something.
It's just something that I think I've had arguments with people where I've said Doctor Doom is a Spider-Man villain. I think I've had physical arguments with people going, "Don't be stupid. He's a Fantastic Four villain."
You got physical.
Never gets that bad. Spider-Man in this series is voiced by, I'm going to butcher the names, I do apologize in advance. Dan Gilvezan is the voice of Spider-Man, who you may remember as the voice of Bumblebee in the Transformers cartoons. Kathy Garver, she was Firestar. You would know her probably from Family Affairs. And the infamous Frank Welker, who plays Iceman, you will definitely know him from 2 characters. But he was the voice of Megatron And even his character looks like this other character. He will also play Fred and Scooby-Doo in the Scooby-Doo cartoons.
I know him primarily as Abu from Aladdin.
I thought you might.
He's definitely got one of the most legendary voice acting careers in all of voice acting history. So,
whilst doing the same voice, it's just the one voice. Just Megatron was just a little bit. They had just some electronics behind it. There's Fred and Iceman could essentially be the same character. But there was a comic version of Spider-Man: The Amazing Friends in late 1981 that basically adapted the pilot episode, which was the triumph of the Green Goblin. Although the comic version altered the story to bring it in line with Marvel's established universe continuity, so making the Green Goblin have a costume as opposed to him being having a physical transformation with the goblin gas or whatever it was called. Firestar wasn't actually accepted into sort of official canon until she appeared in Uncanny X-Men in 1985. Watching thank God for Disney Plus. Now they have every episode on there, and I do recommend anybody that wants to know what it was like watching cartoons in 1983 to go and watch it, because it's like nothing you see now. It's full of jokes. It's full of color and humor, and the Spider-Man I've not seen kind of matched. He's such a fun sort of loudmouth throughout the whole thing, which is the way I like. It's the way I want my Spider-Man to be. Yeah, I can't recommend the series enough.
Question for you, Neil. So, Have you seen Into the Spider-Verse?
Yes, I have.
Correct me if I'm wrong. I'm pretty sure I saw this with Dave, and I think Dave knows exactly what I'm talking about. At the end, there is a credit scene that basically jumps to the past and has an ode to the 80s Spider-Man cartoon, and it's kind of like a meme where they're just like pointing at each other. So
that's actually because I thought it was from this series. I looked it up because I was like, I'm sure that was from this series. No, that was actually from the 1967 original. I think it was 64 or 67. The original The Spider-Man cartoon, which is the very first Spider-Man cartoon, is actually from that. But this style very much followed on. It almost looks identical. They really sort of kept the style of the animated Spider-Man from 60s into the sort of mid 80s.
Thanks for clearing that up, because I really didn't know. I didn't do much research. So Spider-Man pre-90s, I'm really not super, familiar with. But
yeah, I mean, this has been really difficult because when somebody says sort of what are your favorite portrayals of Spider-Man, I'm kind of, there really hasn't been a bad portrayal of Spider-Man. So I've gone more on the sort of the thing that, I mean, it wasn't just the fact that it's Spider-Man. It got me into the things I'm into now. Had that Spider-Man not been around, and had he not sort of captured my imagination the way he did, and the way he was portrayed, the way he was acted, I don't think I would be into I may well not be sat here now because I'll be into, I could be a brony or something, it's
God, I hope not. You should get a t-shirt that says Spider-Man saved my life.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
My favorite Spider-Man is also Peter Parker. However, it is not with great power comes great responsibility. No, I'm talking if those in power can't be trusted, it's the responsibility of the people to remove them. If you want to get to know my Spidey and his origins, you're going to have to go way back to the time of the Great Depression. I'm talking the 1933 Spider-Man Noir. Look at my neck. Does it not say Bogart? Are you kidding me? I love film noir. So give me that gritty detective Spider-Man, almost the same setting as like Batman the Animated Series. Give me something a little similar to the Gray Ghost, and I am 100% on board. So you guys know, we got to see a little bit of Spidey Noir in the Into the Spider-Verse movie, but a lot of people may not know that came out, the portrayal, back in 2009. It started out as a 4-part miniseries, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about it. I'm not going to go through all 4 books, but I want to get people a little hooked on this because I want somebody else out there to say, hey, Dave, I love Spidey Noir also. The series opens up with Jameson dead, dead on his desk. The cops, they burst in, and what do we see except Spidey Noir there? So he's guilty, right? He killed Jameson. No, of course not. And then we get a flashback. the flashback starts out, we have Aunt May, and she's out and she's, being a socialist and she's protesting. And then a group of gangsters known as the Enforcers actually come up to her and they threaten to kind of rough her up. But of course, Peter stands up for her. Then they're going to rough Peter up, and a photographer from the Daily Bugle named Ben Urich, he actually stands up for both of them. And for some reason, the gangsters won't touch him. Right. And he says, just stick with me. Call it the power of the press. They won't hurt me. Next, Ben and Peter, they go to a club called the Black Cat. That's when Ben shows Peter that all of the town's most important people are there. And he gets a good view that nobody is as innocent as they seem. That's when we find out the Enforcers, they come there often, and they are nothing more than mob henchmen of the crime boss, the Goblin, which is awesome. All right. Well, Peter knows the Goblin because his men are the people that beat up his Uncle Ben. Okay. And of course, Peter, this doesn't sit well with him. And so he speaks up against them, and it actually causes him and Ben to get kicked out of the club. And that's when Ben says, you can't do that. That's the dumbest thing I've ever seen. You got to stick with me. You got to keep your lips straight. Well, Ben takes Peter to the Daily Bugle and gets him a job as his assistant. And the first book actually ends with Ben alone in his apartment doing drugs. And he's a depressed person, but we don't know why until it's revealed that Ben was there the night that Ben Parker was killed. And yes, his uncle was beat down by the henchmen, but it was actually Vulture that killed his uncle. And Vulture was a cannibalistic sideshow freak who ate him. So dipping a little dark side, I know, but you want to know what gets me going. Like, I love the film noir, the detective, the old stuff, but now Marvel's getting a little dark, and that totally has my attention.
It's I knew of Spider-Man Noir, but I'd never read it. I mean, I know that the image, I can see the image of him now, just the in the all in black, the sort of big coat and
well, just to kind of further get your interest, because I think I'm doing it here. Everybody wants to know like how Peter Parker becomes Spider-Man throughout. It's similar to like when Batman loses his parents, how he becomes Batman, what drives him. Well, Peter shows up to Ben's apartment and answers a phone call on behalf of Ben, and the people on the other end are the mob henchmen. That's when we find out that Ben is known as the Spider. Okay, and he's in on everything. So Peter goes to the location to meet the henchmen, and that's when he sees the henchmen transporting voodoo artifacts for the Goblin. And they drop one of these spider statues, and it breaks open, and all these spiders come crawling out. All the spiders attack and kill one of the henchmen, but one of them actually bites Peter, and he thinks he's going to die. But what actually happens is he gets transported, kind of like this delusional dream state, that basically the spider talks to him and's like, what are you worried about? Like, my bite only brings death to people with bad intentions. I got something worse for you. I'm going to give you the curse of power. And then what happens to Peter Parker is he wakes up, he falls from a web, but he clearly lands on his feet. He has the ability to crawl on walls, do everything that we've seen. And he has the web shooter, but it's organic. It comes out of his skin, which I absolutely love. And long story short, we find out that, yes, Ben, known as the Spider, works for the Goblin. He basically freelances photography and use it as blackmail and gets paid to keep the photographs off the streets of the henchmen being involved with a whole bunch of bad things that are going on. And when Peter Parker finds out about this, he turns his back on Ben. And Ben decides, okay, I've done my friend wrong. I shouldn't be taking money from the Goblin. I'm going to turn my life around. So he calls Jameson up and tells Jameson, I have the dirt on the Goblin. Jameson says, you have evidence? Okay, I don't want you on the streets. I'm going to come over and get it. And then next thing we know, Jameson shows up and kills Ben. And that's the end of book 2. And that's where I'm going to leave it, except the last couple pages show Peter Parker deciding to become the Spider-Man. And we talk about the aesthetics of the suit and everything. he actually crafts the suit out of his Uncle Ben's war suit.
Does anybody else? Yeah. Does anybody else want to see an animated film of this?
I would love to. That sounds awesome. It sounds a little darker, but I like that.
I can't see Disney doing it, but I would love to see it.
I mean, they did make, Deadpool, and they did make. I don't know. They're just doing more dark things, and.
But they're also cancelling things like Alien and Predator because they don't want this directions they don't want to go in. So I would love. I mean, I'm curious to see what they're going to do with Deadpool 3. I know when this is Spidey talk. As much curious as I am to see what they're going to do with Deadpool 3. I think if they stay dark and do something with Deadpool, then I reckon there might be a chance. And I'm definitely picking these up.
I agree.
Yeah, you sir have just converted me into picking these up. So good job.
All right. So my favorite portrayal of Spider-Man is Spider-Man 2099. We have Miguel O'Hara, just half Irish, half Mexican descent. It starts off a little weird. So his mother, Mexican descent, ends up cheating on Miguel's father's boss, or cheating on him with her father's boss, Tyler Stone. Tyler Stone, basically, he's like the CEO of this mega corporation called Alchemax. Alchemax just so happens to also hire Miguel O'Hara. So transport yourself to the year 2099, where mutants and humans are in the midst of a post-apocalyptic civil war. He's a scientist for Alchemax. Then during this war, his job is to recreate one of the most iconic heroes ever, Spider-Man. So his boss, at one point, laces his drink with a drug. His boss can control people using this drug because apparently once you've taken it once, you're addicted for life. It's also incredibly expensive. So by giving the drug to his employees for free, like it just keeps them satiated, and it's like incredibly hard to get off it. Like you can't get off of it. So Miguel does not like this. He made essentially a genetic sample of his body already, right? His genetic code, he made a copy of it. And in an attempt to get off of the addiction, he tries to run this new experiment. But at the same time, there was a coworker that just didn't like Miguel. He tried to stop him by essentially sabotaging the experiment. In doing so, there's an explosion. In the explosion, all of a sudden, Miguel, his genes are now spliced with a spider, resulting in several new powers. He's no longer addicted to the drug. However, he now has talons that retract, come out of his fingers. He's got fangs. So he thinks of himself as a monster immediately, and then goes home, gets a De los Muertos, or Day of the Dead costume that he's had for a while, because he developed it because apparently, I guess in Mexico, they have some crazy Day of the Dead parties. And so like this particular costume has this special material that it's like super durable and all that stuff. So he essentially dedicates himself to fighting that same mega corporation that drugged him. Later, he finds himself getting caught up with a bunch of like weird time anomalies, and he ends up in multiple realities and universes. He meets Superior Spider-Man and even the original Universe 616 Spider-Man. He helps save the multiverse at one point, and then he even ends up in his original timeline with an advanced suit. That's basically, I mean, there's so much in between there, but that's the gist of Spider-Man 2099. As far as his looks, he's rocking what looks like a fusion of Batman Beyond and Spider-Man. It's still red and blue, but it looks far more menacing. He's got spikes on his forearms like Batman, and he's even got a cape.
I love the suit. I love how menacing he looks. I mean, gone are the sort of traditional Spider-Man sort of webbed sort of webbed costume. It's basically a solid blue now, isn't it?
As far as powers, he's got hypersensitivity. He can see, smell, and hear even for miles. He doesn't have sticky skin like the original Spider-Man, but those retractable talons or claws, he could basically stick to any surface because they can even like cut through. Think of Wolverine, but with like little bitty claws. They can cut through almost anything. He can also use them in combat. So at one point, it's kind of crazy. The guy who originally sabotaged his experiment, caused that explosion, and saw him turn into the Spider-Man, that explosion knocked that guy out the window. Miguel goes to like catch him. He saves his life, but then the talons are literally digging into his skin at this point and causes him to still drop this dude. So he tried to save him, but he ended up dying anyway. So that's like his first experience. Think about how traumatic that is. But he's got more speed, durability, and agility than Peter Parker. He's got spinnerets in his wrists, just like Spider-Man Noir. So he doesn't need the capsules or anything like that. So that's pretty cool. He also has poison fangs that can paralyze his enemies. So one bite from Miguel could cause someone even as strong as Submariner to go into complete paralysis. And if you guys don't know who Submariner is, think of like Aquaman from the DC universe. They're essentially like parallels of each other. And as far as equipment, he's got an unstable molecule suit that adheres to his body, and it's incredibly durable. He also has a cape for gliding. But in his return to his newest form in the year 2099, after all the multiverse events go down, Peter Parker developed like a special Kevlar version of his suit. And he has rocket boots. So yeah, it's pretty awesome. I love this dude because he's got such an awesome backstory to me. It's not super dark, but it forces him to become a hero in a time where he's really needed, and he steps up, even though he could have just been a monster, and he could have easily just cast himself out of society, but he decided to step up. And I first found out about Spider-Man 2099 when I was at a garage sale with my mom one day. I think I was about 7 or 8. I remember it so vividly because I found a bunch of cool comics. Like I found the first issue of the Infinity Gauntlet, or I think it was Infinity War, and that was there, and I had no idea what it was. All I remember is around that time, I always watched like X-Men, the 90s animated series, and the Spider-Man. And then at one point there was an Ultimate Spider-Man, which it looked very similar to this. So I thought that's what it was because they both had capes. They were both like kind of like a black, red, dark suit. And so I grabbed it thinking it might have been that. And I was pleasantly surprised that it was a way better story than Ultimate Spider-Man, in my opinion. But seeing that at such a young age caused me to just like dive way deeper into this. And I really want to see him in an actual movie role. So at the end of Spider-Verse, there was that scene that I was talking about earlier. He actually shows up in the 1960s Spider-Man cartoon in like a little meme where they were pointing at each other. But it just goes to show you Spider-Man 2099 is probably going to be in the new Spider-Verse movie, and I will love to see that. I know it's not live action, but there's been tons of portrayals of him already through video games and whatnot, and every single portrayal has been pretty sweet. So can't wait. I really want a live action version. I think it'd be awesome.
And that wraps up this episode of Spidey-Chat. If you liked the video, don't forget to hit that like button and bell notification so you don't miss out the next time that we talk Spider-Man.